Okay, we'll continue with our discussion on that privileges concept. Yesterday we have created a user. We have seen how to create a user, granting system privileges. Similarly, we can grant object privileges also. Object privileges are nothing but the privileges which are applicable at the object level, database object level. Like, you know, you may have to grant privileges on the tables, procedures, sequences, synonyms, indexes, or maybe even schemas. So those kind of privileges you'll be granting under this object privileges tab. And when you want to grant these object privileges, it's actually a pretty easy activity, a pretty easy task for you. Suppose you want to grant privileges on a table. As an administrator, what you need to know there is that object name. So if you know the object name, you can grant privileges. Okay, I'll show you here. But what you need to remember there is the privileges which are applicable on one object are not same as the privileges applicable on a different type of object. Example, the privileges applicable on the table and the privileges applicable on the procedure are not same. See here, if you go to object privileges, click on this plus button. Suppose you want to grant privileges on the table, you just search for the table. Select the table, see on the right hand side automatically you'll get the list of privileges applicable on the table. You grant whatever you want. Always while you're granting, there is a grantable option. The purpose of that is delegation. I mean, I'm granting it to you, you can further grant to other people like that. But now suppose if I'm selecting a procedure here, then in that case the privileges are not same. So I'm selecting a procedure here. See for the procedure, what are the privileges you have? You don't have anything like select, insert, update and all that. You have drop, execute. Because it's a program, you can execute, you can debug, you can change like that. So if you can apply privileges on a schema, remember that those privileges will be applicable automatically for all those objects comes under that schema. Automatically. Now if I'm granting select privileges on a schema, then it's applicable for all those tables comes under that schema, like that. So these two are more of straightforward privileges, system privileges and object privileges. And you also call them as SQL privileges. Both system and object combined, we call them as SQL privileges sometimes. And then we have analytic package privileges. This, if you want to understand, you need to understand how the development takes place in HANA database. I'll explain you, I'll show you with practical examples. And then application privileges, as I explained yesterday, we have those applications running on Exasential, which we call them as native HANA applications. So if you want to grant privileges on those native HANA applications, you should do it under these application privileges. But that's not the one what we do regularly. The application privileges only you come across only when they develop some applications, native HANA applications. Otherwise, they buy some applications and deploy them on top of Access Engine of HANA. Then only you'll have that. In fact, if you buy applications, they'll give roles there. So generally, only when you develop some native HANA applications, then only that application privileges comes into picture. And the last one, privileges on users, is not a type of privilege. It's basically just an option. It's for debugging purpose. Like if I go to privileges on users, if you click on this plus button, this user ID comes automatically. I logged in with system, so system user, attach debugger. So means now that our user 2 will be able to debug the programs created by the system user. That's the meaning of that. So this is all straightforward, but those analytic and package privileges are slightly different. So to understand that, try to understand how development takes place in HANA database. Now you know that when they go with a native HANA scenario, HANA as a data mart, basically first of all tables will be replicated from the source systems into HANA. Once tables are replicated, on top of that, they build the models. That's what the development here. So all the database objects will be under catalog, whereas all the modeling objects they create under content, which is the responsibility of the modeling consultants. They'll take care of it. So when a modeling consultant want to develop some objects under this content, let us see what kind of privileges he needs. So for understanding that concept more effectively, what I'm doing is in this RH1 database, just creating a new user. Let us create a modeling user. Let us give some name like M user. Then as is a modeling consultant, modeling user, I'm granting a role as a built-in role modeling. And apart from that, this user should have access to the tables based on which you want to build the models. The tables basically which they replicated from the source using some replication technologies. Wow. Otherwise, you can't create the models. Now that we have to do here under object privileges. So instead of giving these privileges on one by one table, which is a lengthy process, you grant the privileges on the schema directly. If you grant the privileges on the schema, automatically it's applicable for all those objects comes under that schema. Click on plus here. I'm selecting the schema here. Directly schema. So on the schema, I'm giving select privilege. Only select privileges are enough for modeling. Now let us log in with this user. Now right clicking on this system, add system with a different user. Steps M user 6. So that old password I'm changing. So now this modeling consultant want to create some modeling objects, and remember that he'll be doing it under content. All the modeling objects they have to create under content. This I'm showing you just for your understanding. It's not that you do this. This is all done by modelers or developers. That's their job. You can see schema is able to access. If you go to content, is having that option to develop the objects. So if you right click on the content here, click on new first. Remember, under the content, if any object they want to create, first of all, they need to create a package. Package is just like group of objects, like folder. Give some name. Delivery unit is optional. Don't worry about that. When we do a transportation, I'll explain you what significance of delivery unit is. Okay. So you can see your package is created here. This one. Under this package only they create the objects. So this is how he creates the objects. Example I'm showing a simple attribute view creation. Right click on the package, new attribute view. Give some name. Finish. Now these views are created based on the tables. Maybe one table or multiple tables. So we need to select those tables. So from that schema eFashion tutorial, I'm just selecting one sample table into the data foundation here. Example, I'm taking these article lookup tables, just simply drag and drop. So I'm selecting the required columns for output, article ID, label. You can observe there those columns are selected for output category here. That's it, nothing else you need to do, activate it. So that's done. So that's how we create users, we grant privileges to those modeling people, they develop the models. But as you are seeing that all those models are developing under content, and that too under the content they have those packages. here. This is content. Under the content only we have these packages. Those objects created under content, we also call them as repository objects. Remember this word, it's very important. The objects created under content, we also call them as repository objects. Another most important concept here is this attribute view is actually created by muser 6. But even though this attribute view is created by this user, he is not the owner of this attribute view. Because this muser 6 is only a developer, one of the developer. There may be a number of developers like this. Like example in your system setup like dev system, quality system, production system. Say all these developments are done in the development system and you have developer users or modeling users created and they developed it. But when you transport these objects to the production system, in the production system we are not going to have developer users. The production system can't have these developer users. So that's why I remember, even though modeling consultants are the people who are responsible for creating these objects under content, but they are not the owners of those objects. They are responsible for creation, but they are not the owners. There is one user, a built-in user, who is owner of this entire repository. Means whatever the objects created under content, which we call them as repository objects. So all those objects under content are owned by only one built-in user. And that built-in username is underscore sys underscore repo. Understand? Underscore sys underscore repo is the built-in user. He is the owner of all the objects created under content. Who is developing is the material. So irrespective of the people who are developing the content objects, owner is only one. Okay, now look at this. Here you can see that user underscore sys underscore repo. So we call these users as technical users. So remember that you can't log in with a technical username. You can't log in with underscore sys underscore repo user. Not possible at all. But he is the user who is the owner of the entire repository. Like this, they develop a lot of objects under that package. So you have content under the content packages. Now, if you want to allow one of the user to access these packages, then you grant these privileges called package privileges. That's why they're given those package privileges. See that if you select any package. Then you can see on the right hand side it show you repo.read, repo.edit like that. Repo means repository. Dot read. So you grant that dot read, repo.read, you'll be able to access those objects under that package. Can't edit, he can't change, but he can access those objects. But now another important thing is whenever these modeling objects has to be created based on some tables, a very significant point, remember. You know that some set of tables under one schema or maybe multiple schemas will be used in modeling. Any modeling you want to create, any modeling object on top of the tables, on those tables, maybe individually, otherwise better on the schema, you grant privileges to this user sysrepo, compulsory. Otherwise they cannot, no one can create the models based on those tables. So what you have to do is before the modeling consultants they build data models, first identify which tables they are going to use for modeling. Go to object privileges of sysrepo. You just click on this plus button. So suppose it's a, see, one by one table, it will be difficult for you to grant because there will be hundreds of tables they use. So instead of that, you just choose the schema itself directly. Advantage I told you, if you grant the privileges on the schema, that is automatically applicable for all those tables comes under that schema. Now what you need to grant is, you need to grant select privileges because modeling is all about reading the data. It's only select privileges you need to grant with the grantable option. That's it. Which already I did here. That's why we are able to create those models there. Look at this. This select with grantable. That's enough. Other things are not needed. Insert updates are not needed. So that's one thing which you need to take care of. Now coming to the next thing, the package privileges, similarly analytic privileges. What is this analytic privilege? Why do you need it? So just now I shown you how we can create attribute view, how the modeling consultants they create the models. They create attribute views, analytic views, calculation views. Ultimately, based on these models, they build the reports. See, I'm trying to open the data of this. And here you look at the raw data, the data what they can access generally. 212 records we have there. So if they build a report and if that report is given to end user, this is what the data end user can access. But now here is the concept. Suppose in a company, they created a model like this for sales and they build a report on top of that model. And then that report is given to two sales employees. It's obvious that both the sales employees can access the same data. Same data. But requirement in the company is one employee is working for South region, another employee is working for North region. The employee who is working for South region, we want to restrict him to access only South region sales data. Employee working for North region should be restricted to access only North region sales data. So how do you do that? One option is they need to create two different views with the different conditions, filter conditions, and create two reports and give it to them, which is not a viable option at all. Not at all. Then in those situations, to handle actually those situations, they have this concept called analytic privileges. So what you can do is on top of those models, you can create analytic privileges with the conditions, and those analytic privileges can be granted to the users. So these privileges, analytic privileges, are based on the conditions. So there is no way you can find ready-made analytic privileges. No one can predict the conditions. Conditions has to be given by the customer. So based on their requirements, these analytic privileges must be created before they can be granted to users. So this is a different concept. So now you are not creating any privileges. You are just granting. But here, analytic privileges must be created before they can be granted to users. So it's a responsibility of the modeling consultants to create these analytic privileges. It's not done by you. It's done by modeling consultants. Under those packages, as part of the modeling itself, along with all the modeling objects like attribute views, analytic views, calculation views, there itself they create these analytic privileges also. So that they will be built along with the models and transportation also, along with all the modeling objects they can transport to the target. So I'll show you a simple example on that. I mean, this is not your job anyhow. It's done by modeling people. You just grant, that's enough. But anyway, I'm showing just a simple example to restrict the data. There, out of 212 records, I want to restrict this user to access only one category data, jewelry category. So that 36 records you have there. Give some name. So there are different types of privileges. We'll choose here. I'm going with the classical ones. That you don't worry. Modelers will take care of it. Now select that view, that attribute view, analytic view, calculation view, anything, whatever they create. Finish. And here On the right hand side, we'll select the attribute based on which condition need to be applied, and then the condition. That's it, analytic privilege is created and they should be granted to a end user. So for that, let us create a user, then you'll understand it clearly. Let us create a normal business end user. Let us grant the privileges to him and then check whether that restriction is working or not. I'm first granting the package. This just give repo.read, and then I'm granting that analytic privilege. But actually, only just granting these two are not enough. You log in with that user, you'll realize that. User 6. Now this user, end user, go to content. See, is not allowed to access the content at all. So there are some additional privileges required. You go to object privileges. There is actually one procedure which is given there called repository rest. So you need to grant execute privileges on repository rest. Here you can see that. Clearly that message is there. Then it will allow you to access the content. But you can't see the data. If you want to see the data, two more object privileges, two schemas we need to grant here. One is sysbi, sysbic. These two are built-in schemas on which just you need to grant select, only select. Check the data preview now. She is able to see only jewelry category articles data because I restricted like that. If the value is changed, automatically the change will be reflected here. So this value I'm changing to botware. So then here if you refresh it will be botware only like that. So this is how we can restrict the data access to the users. using this concept called analytic privileges. Again, I'm repeating that no built-in analytic privileges. They must be created before they can be granted to users. It's the responsibility of the modeling consultants to create these analytic privileges as part of the modeling itself, along with all other modeling objects. Then you as an administrator need to grant these privileges to the users. So these are the different types of privileges: system, object, analytic, package, application, and this is just an option, privileges on users. That's it. And we know that generally we don't recommend granting the privileges to the users directly. It's always as part of the security designing. You better use the concept of roles. So using the roles, you grant the privileges to the users, so that maintenance becomes more easier for you. So first you create a role and then grant a privilege to the role. Set of privileges is nothing but a role. Then role you need to grant to the user. A simple ask. But when it comes to roles, there are two types of roles: design time roles, which we also call them as repository roles, and runtime roles. Runtime roles means the roles which you create under this security here in HANA Studio. So these are runtime roles. So you can't transport them. See, users you don't need to transport, but definitely roles need to be transported. So if you create roles here under this security in HANA Studio, you can't transport them, which we call them as runtime roles. If you want to create design time roles or repository roles which can be transported to the target systems, you need to use something called Web Development Workbench Editor. Through browser, you need to access it. So using that Web Development Workbench Editor, so you'll be able to create those repositories. So basic rule, always remember what are the objects we create under content here under those packages. All of them can be transported. How do you transport? We'll see. I'll show you the transportation mechanism and all that. So the browser you need to access it. It's called editor, ID editor. So here, if you right click on this package, you have an option to create the role. You don't have this option there in Studio. You right click on the package and new, we don't have any role concept there. So if you want to create repository roles which can be transported to your target database, it should be created under the packages. That is possible only by using web ID editor, which you can access by using this URL, hostname colon port number. Port number is standard port 80, then instance number, /SAP/HANA/ID/editor. Directly you can access that editor. Pretty simple actually. You just right click, new role, give whatever the role you want to give, and just grant the privileges to that role. See, that's this all same again. System, object, analytic, all those privileges concept is same. See how simple is that. When you save it, see it's asking for this change list, which is basically meant for transportation. I'll show you how to transport, how to configure these transports. Done. But that won't happen if I create this role here. Concept is same, but the place you create at purpose is different. Here you need to assign it to any of the schemas, and then privileges you grant, whatever it is. One role can be granted to another role, then it will show you that as a part of the roles like that. And whatever the role you are creating, there in ID editor, it's visible here. You can see that, but you can't maintain it from here. See this? This is the role we have created. It will show you clearly this as a repository role. When you place the cursor on that, it will show you that you can't edit the repository roles in HANA Studio. It should be maintained only from that web IDE only. There's no other option for you. That's the way it should be. But if you want, you can grant those roles to the users. Not a problem. From here, from HANA Studio itself. But you can't edit, you can't maintain. That's the concept. Okay, so these are some of the security aspects, like privileges and all that. And you have small things like uh, password policies. There is a concept called a simple concept called encryption for more security. So the small configurations I'll show you tomorrow. I'll explain you that, and then we'll start with a new topic tomorrow. Okay, so go ahead and practice this.